We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowski, and since Susan is off this week on March break, I guess I have to introduce myself. I am a former MIT engineer and now a high-performance leadership coach. That's me, and we have a special guest with us. The founder and CEO of 10Spot, Sammy Courtright, is with us. Sammy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Rob. How are you doing? And you are filling in perfectly for Susan. Not that I've met her yet. However, you're doing a fantastic job so far.
Thank you so much. I do the intros and the outros, so I'm already up to speed with that. But it's already part of the game, right? And we always like to start off the show with a quote. And so I got a great quote here from a Greek Stoic philosopher called Epictetus. And he says, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Sammy, what do you think about the quote?
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? I always think about, I personally see myself as a forever student. That's kind of how I approach life. I'm always interested in learning. I'm enrolled in several Coursera classes on different things that I don't know much about. And I think that is really true. There becomes a moment in your life where you're like, shoot, maybe I don't know everything, or I thought I did know everything, and I in fact don't. And that is a very humbling and, in my opinion, fantastic experience to go through, because then comes the exploratory, do I want to learn this? Am I going to invest the time? Is there purpose behind this? And taking the leap or not. If you feel like you know it all, maybe you wouldn't.
And that's something that we come across, and I'm sure you guys at 10Spot come across it a lot, is people who aren't willing to change the way they lead. And that's where I kind of pulled this out, was what I've been thinking a lot lately, and what actually my TED coach is asking me to think about is, what do 1.0 leaders say? And a lot of it is, I already know the answers, or I already do that. But before we get into that, let's start with it. So, Sammy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about 10Spot?
Sure. Okay, I'll start with me, and then it naturally segues to 10Spot because, it is my baby. So, I'm Sammy. I was born in London, moved to the US, and then moved to Australia. I was raised in Australia for 7 to 18, and then moved back to the US to go to University of Miami in Florida. Yeah. People are like, Ohio? And I'm like, I'm telling you, I don't know if I would have made the move from Australia to go there. Not that it's not a fantastic school, but Miami was more of the the vibe, very close in nature to Australia. And then really in my senior year of college, I hate when people say my entrepreneurial journey, but I did start a jewelry company with 3 other girls in my senior year of college. They were based out in Los Angeles, so I'd be traveling back and forth on weekends to help get things off the ground. And then upon graduating, I moved out to Los Angeles. And that is also at that time, but a couple of years later, after I had exited the jewelry company, where I met my co-founder, John Cohen, and we began a company at the time called FitSpot, which is now turned today into 10Spot. And I'm more than happy to talk about how we had to pivot throughout the pandemic. However, 10Spot today, we are a workforce engagement platform. We help companies connect and engage distributed teams.
And so when you say connect and engage folks, a lot of people are still learning how to engage their teams remotely. What are some of the things that you help them do?
Sure. So there's kind of several components or features that really that we find, kind of really get employees engaged at work. And this is applicable to distributed teams, fully, hybrid or in-office teams. We've really tried to understand how people like to engage. So how do your colleagues, teammates, or employees actually like to engage? We sometimes immediately think that it's how we like to engage. I like these things, therefore my team will like these things. And to your point earlier, Leadership 1.0, that might not be the most effective way. So through a series of questions that we ask employees and users of our platform, we start better understanding this person prefers to communicate via Slack or MS Teams, or they like email or voice calls or voice memos or memes. There's so many methods of communication of which to, more effectively engage with your team. We've also found that if we make it more non-work related, we get a higher chance of engaging an individual. So work-related things, if I always came to you with projects and I need updates on these things and I want to better understand where we're at with certain timelines or deadlines, that's a very different relationship than if I'm coming at you saying, hey, do you want to play a round of trivia? Tell me what your favorite type of cookie is. What's your favorite pizza topping? So we found that we get more engagement from individuals when it's non-work related. And then finally, and probably it's not most importantly, but we've found a really sweet spot of time, as in how long things should be. And we've learned that it's the shorter, the better. When I say that, I mean, if you're like, hey, let's play a trivia game, let's make that 5-10 questions. A really quick opportunity to engage with that individual, form a connection with that individual, and then, kind of carry on. You can repeat it the next day if you want to. You can repeat it 10 times that day. I wouldn't recommend playing trivia 10 times per day. But same with any of our, we have a ton of content on our platform that you can watch together as a team. You can engage with each other in the content. And we found that the shorter form content, even 30 minutes or less, whether it be on how to craft the perfect cocktail or how to perfect your LinkedIn profile page, the shorter, the better, gets maximum engagement.
And I think what you're going at is something that we always start with, and that's connection on a human level. Do you want to talk about how important is that connection, both in terms of forming teams, but also in terms of leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. We know, there's probably endless studies that indicate if you're connected to your team, your colleagues, then you're all marching towards the same goal. There's a higher likelihood that you're aligned and that you're all able to head in the right direction because there's clear communication. Everyone knows what their purpose is. I think there's a really interesting tie, more relevant now than I think was articulated in the past, about being connected to the purpose of the company and being connected with the mission of the company. I think in the pandemic, people were like, whoa, now I suddenly have to work from home with all of these other distractions, kids, parents, whatever it might be. And I kind of forgot what I was doing. I was kind of just going through and checking off tasks. But now that we've really settled into whatever our routine might be for now, it might change in the future. I think people are using this as an opportunity to understand, am I still connected to what we are delivering? Do I know every day the work that I am putting in leads to the company performing XYZ? And I think that connection, and that really ties into great leadership as well, making sure that your team does feel connected, not only to each other, but to the mission and the purpose of the company. It really creates a lot more of a cohesive environment, and I think is one of the number one, kind of facets or components of great leadership.
It's so true. It's something that I've just been reading a ton about, as everyone's talking about year 2022 as being year of purpose, and how Gen Zs and millennials, they're looking for companies that do greater things than just make money. What have you heard on your end?
Yeah, we ran several studies and surveys, and the intention was actually not to hone in on Gen Z, but the responses were so clear from Gen Z individuals. And I'm happy to share the link where we've published all of the statistics from this data. But you're absolutely right. There is this clear passion and desire to work for companies that represent who you are. I think previously, a lot of people approached job and work for monetary reasons, and I absolutely have no problem with that, and I still think that that's relevant today. However, Gen Z specifically are very focused on, does this represent who I am? could I tell my friends at dinner that I work for this company and talking about all the initiatives that we stand for? Would that make me proud? Would I feel connected to that? And it was pretty astonishing that it was such a clear, it was a very high number, a very high percentage said that it was extremely important that companies align with their values, beliefs, and principles, and then more importantly, do something, are active, aren't just passive when it comes to social issues or anything that's happening in the world. So very interesting data.
And that's really the interesting thing, right? Is like every company has values and missions and all these things on the wall, but actually walking the walk and in those critical decision points, aligning your decision with the values. And I love how Ryan Chan put it, the CEO at Upkeep. He said, like, we wanted our values to help our people make decisions that are difficult. And so that I found was like a great thing to think about, because he has like one of their values is, the customer over profits. And so when you're going out there and making a decision, it's like, well, it's pretty clear what the answer is I'm trying to help the customer perform better.
Yeah, I love that. I think what an interesting approach to running a business. And I think just based on the data, that would be something that a lot of Gen Zers would be attracted to. And therefore, when they're attracted to it, they're really committed. They're really showing up every day and bringing their whole selves to work because it represents who they are.
And so let's dive deeper into that. Like, what were some of the other findings you found about Gen Z?
A ton. So talking about bringing whole selves to work, I think, or rather, I know that employers have now really realized that employees are not just employees, specifically Gen Z. They're people with lives outside of work. And
what a concept.
Yes. And I know that sounds so obvious, but I think before it was like, well, I did my job from 9 to 5. I checked in, checked out, and I was a fantastic, individual during that time. However, it's a lot more on, we've always known this, but in the last 2 years, I think we've learned a lot about our coworkers, dogs, cats, kids, partners, parents, and coworkers' lives that we've never previously really saw and understood. And I think this blurred line between work and life has really encouraged employees to expect their companies to consider and acknowledge their whole selves and the roles that they play outside of work, whether it be parenthood or caring for an aging parent or pursuing a passion like playing in a band, taking, yoga teacher training classes. And this response that we saw in our data, Gen Z very much no longer wants a one-size-fits-all approach to the entire employee experience, but specifically benefits and perks. There was a clear understanding that, hey, while this is great, I need to know how this is impacting my life and my whole self at work, especially when it came to health and wellness, mental, physical, financial, social wellness, and really also embracing flexible work hours. Like, I will get the job done, but it might not be within the constraints of the office hours. And I'm doing inverted commas, those of you that are listening, that are being, set up. So I think this customization and personalization of benefits, perks, and an intentional employee experience was a really clear understanding we collected from our data.
I love when you said intentional, because I think that's something that I talk to leaders about the most, is especially when it comes down, when it comes down to anything, but remote work specifically, is people go, well, it's hard to, build connection remotely. It's hard to lead remotely, or it's hard to do these things remotely. And it's that, yes, when you were in the office, you ran into people at the coffee machine, or you talked to them about their weekend because they were standing and you ran into them. But now you just need to have more intention. It's not that it doesn't change how you do it. It just, you have to be more intentional because I can't bump into you. Now, Sammy, I guess let's go a little bit back here. So you mentioned you pivoted from FitSpot to 10Spot. Like let's talk a little bit about that. What was that all about?
Sure. So FitSpot, formerly, we delivered scalable and community-driven wellness experiences on site to companies nationwide. So whether it be a yoga class, financial wellness class, a wine and paint night, you name it, we delivered these really unique experiences that were intended to bring people together in the physical workspace. So March 2020, as you can imagine, my co-founder and I looked around and said, well, it doesn't seem like this will be happening. Now, the big caveat here was, but for how long? If this is a 3 to 6 month thing, fine. We can survive that and stick that out. We had fantastic customers and we're doing really well. But then we started collecting the initial data from Asia and Europe that was kind of just a step ahead of the pandemic than we were in the US. And we saw very quickly that the future of work had fundamentally changed. And if we were to stick with our former business model, we would be left behind. So we presented this data to our company at the time and we said, hey, we're making this decision that it's probably best for our business and our livelihoods to move to become a SaaS tool. Now, what explicitly that is going to be, we all have to get on the phones and figure that out. We all have to interview customers and figure that out. And every single person was like, yeah, we see it. Now that the data is coming in and we're understanding what's happening, around the world, this is an opportunity for us. And I'm so grateful that we were in a position, and we still are in a position as an early stage startup, to be agile. And not only agile with our business, but agile with our thinking. We're able to say, what if this isn't the right thing? What if we could do something a little bit different? So that led to us running hundreds of customer interviews, and really the overall sentiment that I could say we could take away from every single conversation was this idea of, how do I get people to feel like they work for the same company when they're no longer in the same space? And I found that really interesting. And that is really the catalyst that kicked off what 10Spot is today. So centered around bringing people together and workforce engagement.
I just want to highlight that moment, the transparency and vulnerability that you showed about, this is the data. Obviously, our business is it's going to need to change.
Sure.
And we don't know what the answer is yet. And I think that piece there, like where we started at the beginning, if you know everything and you expect yourself to know everything, then that's incredibly destabilizing. Yeah. But for you, it was, this is our path and we'll sort of see where it's going to go. Like, how did that feel for you?
To be honest, I think now that it's been 2 years, I'm able to comment on this without getting emotional. But honestly, it was probably one of the worst times, that uncertainty, because it wasn't just uncertainty about the future of our business. There was uncertainty with our health, our families. There were so many other factors that kind of, I don't want to say clouded, but were really distracting during that time. And I remember sitting there thinking, the entrepreneurial side of me is extremely excited that there is a problem out there for us to solve, and that we are going to be the right people to solve that problem. That was really exciting. But all the other stuff that I know my colleagues were going through and that we personally were going through, I was like, this is crap. What a distracting and debilitating time. And I wondered if it was going to impact our creativity, because you're just like, survival, like, let's just go for the option. But people were quite open-minded, because I think everything else was so stressful. They were like, sure, what's this? Let's play with it. Let's hear all the ideas and end up aligning on one of them, because everything else required so much heavy decision making and so much thought, into these other issues, that work suddenly actually felt a little bit lifted. It felt less serious. And so I think now that I'm able to comment on it, I can be really transparent about how frustrating and difficult and stressful that time was, not only for me, but I definitely know for our colleagues. But we figured it out.
And so going a little bit deeper there, like, how did you as a leader support your employees going through that incredible time?
I found that acknowledging it in itself, acknowledging that this was a shared experience. Now, everyone's individual experience was extremely different. However, collectively, it wasn't just, 5 people are going through this, or people just located in this part of the world are going through this. This was impacting everyone, which, to be frank, is quite unique. I think that we haven't really had, like, when there's bushfires in Australia, where my family's from, I remember people reaching out being like, Australia, how are you doing? How are your family doing? And so sweet. But now I'm like, wow, this is every person. Every person is being impacted by this in some way. So I found the first step, and initially, to be frank, I wasn't very good at that. I would get on calls with people and it would be right to business, and it would be like, let's get these, because so much else was going on. I just wanted to use these calls to get the work stuff done so that I could go back to fretting about the world ending. And I think once I realized that, I remember in a meeting, we were all getting together talking about work stuff, and there was this moment where I just said, this isn't working. And I just said, let's stop talking about all this stuff. How are you guys doing? How is everyone doing? And the meeting was only supposed to be 30 minutes. I think we went for like 90 minutes, and everyone just vented about how they were doing. And I realized that I had missed the mark for the first couple of weeks. I was so focused on just getting the task at hand and moving this business forward that I forgot that these are people and that we're all sharing this experience. So I very quickly, after that conversation, I said, okay, we got to do a lot more of that, Sammy. We got to check in with individuals more. We have to acknowledge that this is happening. And then we have to ask the questions that maybe people aren't asking. How are you doing? How are you showing up to work? Is this difficult? What are you balancing at the moment? You find out that people are doing their kids' homework or setting up their kids' Zoom sessions while trying to deal with a customer call. How can we make that better for you? What can we do differently? We're not there in the physical space, but could we help with the office setup a little bit more? Is there something that we can do to support that time? And I'm really glad that we did that. I think that it reminded our team that also John and myself are human beings too, even though, we run this company and there's sometimes a bit of that disconnect, that we are also going through this and we want to support you in the best way we can. But it also reminded us that, this is a pretty big deal, and how can we support you?
And under there is an element of caring about your people and them feeling that. Yeah. And I think that's what, like, literally last week, we had a few clients that we held, basically was just spaces for these conversations to go down about what's going on in Europe. And it wasn't about solving anything. Like, obviously we can't solve anything, but it was just allowing people to speak about what they feel and offload some of that. And my therapist calls it riding the DBT wave, which is the emotion builds and then you let it out and then it comes down. And you could see that in people is through some of those calls, they just felt better at the end. And I think that's something you can learn it as a leader, but not many leaders learn how to hold space for those. So I'm glad you jumped in full speed with that.
Yeah, me too.
So Sammy, like, you do a lot of work around the future of work. like, where do you see work going?
So I had a conversation with Danielle Farage, who is one of our mutual connections. And she brought up something really interesting. And it was this idea of, are we laying the foundation? Are we building companies and building cultures where our kids would enjoy where they work, our future kids enjoy where they work? And that really got to me. I was like, oh, I don't have kids yet, but what am I doing today? What does the future of work look like so that my kids, the questions that I get from my colleagues today and the sentiment that I'm picking up from a lot of the surveys and customer conversations where it's like, help, the great reshuffle. How do we, albeit sometimes stuff like that does need to happen and things need to change. There needs to be a major catalyst for this type of change, but how could we make that better for our future kids? And so I found that I found that comment really interesting. So first and foremost, I do think several things are going to really improve this. I think as AI really becomes a part of our everyday fabric, this idea of feeling connected to your career and your purpose, I think the way that we look for jobs and apply for jobs and get hired at jobs and retire at jobs is going to be extremely customized and personalized. And I think it's going to be very much based on what is my career goal. Ideally, so much so I highlight a few LinkedIn profiles of people that I really admire and I want their careers. And then it's so intelligent that it helps shape job openings and things saying like, hey, you love Stephanie or Rob. Here are several things that Rob did, and we recommend you apply to those jobs, because you'll be following a similar career path and trajectory. It becomes less about, letting the work dictate your opportunities, promotions, mentorship opportunities, and a little bit more focused on you personally. What do you want from this company or from other opportunities? So I think AI is going to play a really interesting role. I also think that the future of work for employees will be heavily mentor-based. I already know that individuals are seeking mentors and already have those established, but I think there's going to be a real emphasis on mentor-mentee relations and how those, kind of connections really foster a fantastic workplace. And I also think, and final note on that, is that mentorship or leadership today as we know it is going to come from multiple different places. And I think we already see this on social media. People are viewing influencers as leaders, are viewing micro-influencers, individuals that are part of their community that are saying something that they agree with, selling something that they agree with, using something that people agree with. We're using them as leaders. So I think employees in the future will not just be relying on what the company can provide, but there will be many external resources that kind of really shape the employee experience.
Do you not see yourself as a leader to people outside of your company?
Who knows? I think I do. And I don't know whether this is like tall poppy syndrome in Australia where they just don't allow you to be like, yes, I do. But I know that I do impact some individuals' lives when I speak to people about wanting to start their business and provide advice to specifically women who are like, hey, I want to take this leap and I'm uncertain how to take the first step. I definitely know that we have some fantastic conversations and guidance, and we work together to ensure that that kind of happens. So I know that there is an impact there.
You're definitely a leader, Sammy. And this actually, it's not just an Australian thing. It's something that I see. I didn't believe I was a leader, to be honest, when I walked and started doing this journey myself. And it was mainly just because I hadn't had a direct report.
Sure.
And so you're like, well, how could I, even though I had this like global podcast and like people were reaching out and like all this stuff. And it was like, no, like, how could I be a leader? Like, I don't manage anybody.
Sure.
But that's like very old school thinking. And that's, some of the stuff that we're like, literally whoever is listening to this, is looking at us as leaders today. And once you start to make that switch, for me, it changed the content I put out because I was trying to fundamentally guide them differently than before.
Yeah. I really appreciate the way that you phrased that. It gives me a significantly different perspective.
And I'll push you a little bit deeper, and I know we're going to get to this question anyways, but one question we always talk to our leaders about is their legacy. And so, what do you want your legacy to be?
I've been thinking about this, and it does slightly circle back to the conversation that Danielle and I had, which was, are we laying the foundation? Are we really building companies and cultures where our future kids really enjoy where they work? They feel a sense of purpose. They feel connected to what they're doing, and they're working for fantastic companies that really align with what they want to do and the change that they want to see in this world. So my legacy, I feel, is, or I want it to be tied up in that, making the future of work better for future generations.
I love that. And it's a great question because I don't think in the early 1900s people were thinking, what's the foundation of work that we're setting right now?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's where things change. That's where generations change. And that's the beautiful thing. Each one that comes in takes the learnings from the previous and then shapes it to be their own and you know, does with it and really executes on that. So I really hope that it can be an impact for future generations in the workplace.
It will be. It's already happening. Now, Sammy, when we talk about that, like, what are some of the things that leaders are struggling with now to keep their people engaged?
Yeah, it's interesting because I mentioned this earlier, but I've noticed that conversations have been around this idea of, you know, how do I connect and engage my teams? And I talk to leaders and I talk to companies about what they're doing today. And it kind of circles back to my comment of they're kind of forgetting that we're all people. And I think that they're forgetting that there isn't just this one size fits all approach that we can take. Oh, we've applied this and the whole company is implementing this new thing that will guaranteed connect and engage them. It's like, well, okay, we've established that each person really enjoys connecting and engaging with each other in very different ways. So the first piece of advice that I give individuals, and it's a really fun exercise that we do, it's called creating a user guide. A user guide is an operating manual of how you operate. It's so weird that we started a company or we're already in a company. We get all of these operating guides for the technologies, the SOPs, how things work, but we don't get one on our colleagues. Don't get one on the people. What time of day do you like to work? How do you prefer to communicate? How do you like to receive feedback? And then other important information. Do you have any pets at home? You know, the crucial things that we need to know that really help us connect and engage with our colleagues and employees on a deeper level. So creating this user guide, and it's not just something that you create once and never touch again. Ideally, it's updated semi-annually, annually, or quarterly, depending on how your preferences change. And then it's shared with the whole company or shared with the whole team, depending on the size of the company and team. And then individuals can comment on it. Connections are created. You like that restaurant? I love that restaurant. Let's go sometime. You have 6 kids. I have 6 kids. What a small world. Isn't it chaotic? And people are finding these user guides really help lay the foundation also for leaders to know a lot more about their team, learn a lot more of how they like to communicate, how they like to receive feedback, and what time of day they like to work. Hey, don't reach out to them in the morning. They're night owls. Let's find different ways to communicate. It's a lot more customized. So when people are I don't want to say failing today, but don't feel like they're quite getting it right, it's because they tend to be taking a little bit more of, this is how I like to operate, and therefore my team likes to operate it this way. And it's less customized, less getting to know you. So that's usually the first step that I really encourage, is like, hey, let's change that mentality. Let's get this a little bit more about the employee. Let's learn a little bit more, and then let's apply those learnings.
I love that. And on that note, the last time we spoke, you were going to dive into Love is Blind season 2. How was that?
Did I ever? And to your point, you're absolutely right. I do also have Japan, and I do also have Brazil. So that's been on my to-watch list. But yes, I watched season 2. For those of you who don't know, Love is Blind is a social experiment reality TV show available on Netflix. And you are paired up with individuals. There's a set number of women and a set number of men. And then you are put into these pods where you cannot see one another, but you're supposed to converse with one another. And the idea is that love is blind. You do not need to see a person to fall in love with them. At the very end, once you are engaged, you're allowed to reveal yourself, and you meet each other and, kind of see how it goes. And there's either a wedding or not a wedding. So season 2, wow, so much commentary on season 2. There's a lot of people that I like and a lot of people that I don't like, but it's such an interesting series, isn't it? It really teaches you a lot about vulnerability, about human nature, about, more importantly, what people are seeking from relationships. And I find that the conversations that are taking place, albeit it's edited, it's chopped down to just the juicy stuff that I'm sure people want to hear, but I do still find it interesting, the questions that are being asked, and when people are their most vulnerable and what triggers certain responses. I find that side of it to be so interesting.
It's exactly right. And we can apply this to the human experience, both in the remote work sense and the in-person work senses.
Yeah.
Vulnerability creates connection. That's like literally the point of it. And you don't need to be standing next to the person to be vulnerable. And like, I've had some incredibly vulnerable conversations these last 2 years over platforms like this. And I think it's created connection in ways that we didn't really think about before. And leaders can do that, but it takes intention and deliberate action.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does.
I love it. So, Sammy, the last question before we get you out of here is, do you have any, like we talked a lot about like being intentional, being individual focused, and like really focusing on what they want from work. Do you have any other tips that you want our leaders to know about in terms of building and engaging their workforce?
Sure. I'm happy to leave you with this thought. I think, in fact, I know that the way that employees are engaging with work today is different than it was in the past and in this particular area. When someone starts a job, no one is, well, I guess no longer are we really in the stage of life or in, time where people used to stay 10 years at a specific job. If it happens, it happens. That's amazing. Let's celebrate that. However, most individuals are spending 2, 3, 4 years kind of max in a position. And I think as a leader, the quicker you're able to wrap your head around that, the more that you're able to get out of employees. I have conversations with people that are like, hey, I know you're not going to stay here forever. That's reality, right? What do you need from this job to get you to your next opportunity? Where do you want to go? What can you suck out of this company that you can add to the resume that will get you to that next spot? And then let's align on that, because that needs to align with whatever, we have outlined for this particular role and what objectives we need to accomplish together as a team. But having those conversations have made it so much more, it's not really relaxed, but there's just an understanding. It's common ground. It's less of this, oh, they're interviewing for other positions. Why are they interviewing for, you're not caught off guard. You're like, yeah, it's been those couple of years. We've aligned on the objectives of what we want to accomplish. And then it's nearly like, let me be a reference. Instead of not listing your existing company, let me be a reference. Because then I will spread this wisdom and spread this advice to the next individual, talk about all the wonderful things that we accomplished and areas of strengths and weaknesses, whatever questions they might ask, but list us. We can help you get to that next, stage of your career. And it's not easy to do. It goes against a lot of the, as a co-founder specifically, a lot of like the fundamental need to keep everyone, happy together and at the existing company, at the existing business. But it has changed the way that we perceive our team and how they perceive us. So I think that is something that I would encourage individuals to, it isn't really embrace, but to acknowledge.
I love that. And it's something I talk to my leaders about, is the career conversations and guiding people in the ways they want to be guided. And the other thing that I just want to cement in here is reputation. And you as a leader and TenSpot as a company are developing a reputation by doing this for your people as a place that people should want to go and work so they can develop. And people are looking for development. Like you can see the statistics on that. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's another piece that we've seen, especially with the better.com thing that's going on, is the bad reputation follows you and the good reputation follows you.
Unfortunately, that is very true. Yes.
So, Sammy, this was an incredible discussion, and I would love to have you back on in the future when Susan's back, and we'll pick your brain further. But where can people find more about you? And obviously, they can go to tenspot.com to find out everything that's going on there. And whenever you publish the paper, shoot it my way, and I'll definitely spread it around. Now, but where can people follow you?
Sure. I am most active on LinkedIn. So just type in, linkedin.com/Sammy Courtright. And I would love to connect. Otherwise, you can shoot me an email, sammy@tenspot.com.
Awesome. And we'll drop those into the podcast notes. So if you're looking for Sammy's contact info, we will do that there. And I know I'm going to connect you to a few of my leaders that I'm sure want to talk to you. So that'll be great as well. And for us, obviously, hit subscribe to the Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform. Share the podcast with any leaders in your life. And actually, you can share a Q&A that Sammy and I did a few weeks ago as well. That was a great one. So if you want to check that one out, it's on TenSpot as well. And yeah, I mean, this was a great episode. And where I want to leave people with is all starting where we started. And it starts, and I got a quote here from Jay Samit, and he says, all disruption starts with introspection. And that was that critical moment where Sammy and her team saw what the pivot was going to have to happen. And then it became, well, what are we going to do? That moment of transparency, that moment of vulnerability, that moment of, well, we got to change. And if we don't change, we're dead in the water. And that's, we started off with the man who thinks he knows everything. And that's the complete opposite of that. Sammy, I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.